When we dream, it's always big, and we see ourselves under the brightest of lights. Reality is, success is highly relative. So many artists never reach the top of their profession, but live very successful lives as middle-class musicians. Sadly, we don't hear about those stories, only the ones about the world-famous ones. But the triumphs in my career helped magnify the need to redefine what making it really means. For me, it wasn't about being all over the radio or all over the TV screen. It was about the moment I was able to resign from my job of 13 years to become a full-time musician. I had made it. The moment I was able to support myself, my kids, and provide opportunities to others, I had made it. Since then, I've become a musical culture ambassador to 11 different countries around the world, a songwriter to major networks, artistic partner to the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, a record label owner, a founder of my own nonprofit, and a Grammy voting member. Yes, everything I mentioned are accomplishments, but each one of these endeavors can be measured by its impact. Whether I'm starting a project from scratch, or I'm starting an initiative I'm passionate about, or I'm building a partnership, the goal is always the same. How can I provide a better opportunity for tomorrow's musicians and our future leaders? So, here is my unexpected rise to unknown role model to the world. Now, my path to purpose definitely wasn't an easy one, and there were certain criteria I had to be willing to accept in order to reach my potential. I had to be willing to adjust. I had to gain perspective, but also be willing to accept the perspective of others. I had to sacrifice. I had to learn to persevere, all wrapped in one. I had to learn to trust the process, and most of all, I had to have a goal to attain. Now, I can definitely say I learned how to adjust on the fly very early in life. My dad served 27 years in the Army, so I spent the first 15 years of my life moving every 2 to 3 years. I moved around so much I was actually born in Germany, and in all I lived in Germany twice in 7 different states. But I learned this: the only constant in life is change, and all this change led me to different defining moments in my life. My first defining moment came when we were stationed in Germany the second time, and I had a class play to be in, and we was able to invite our parents. My dad was working, so my mother came. And I remember after the play was over with how excited my mother was, because from her perspective, she saw me unlock a gift for acting. From my perspective, I was just trying to get an A and just get the assignment over with. But my mother would use this moment to encourage me to do entertainment or something in music pretty much the rest of my life. Now, my second defining moment, I actually realized it. And this is when we moved to Georgia, and by this time I was a big hip hop fan. I was starving myself weekly, saving up my money to buy a new tape every Tuesday. I was getting up at 7 a.m. in the morning to watch ONTB raps and tape it. Hip hop was a part of me. But when we were living in Georgia, I got cool with a couple of friends, and they always were rapping, always beatboxing during recess, and any moment they could. And as much as I loved hip hop, I would never rhyme, rap, or anything. And it got to a point where they pretty much said, listen, if you're gonna hang out with us still, you gotta start rhyming. Now, I'm sure they weren't serious, but when you're a kid and you're moving around a lot, you do anything to keep friends. But this was the push I needed, because I remember going home and feeling that pressure of, I've never done this before. But then as I started writing, how natural it felt, and this adrenaline rush that I got, because I had discovered a gift that had been locked prior to this situation. So I kept music close to me ever since. But even still, thanks to my dad, sports definitely outweighed music and acting early in my life. My dad was famous for taking us to the batting cage, football field, basketball court, pretty much anything active. And what this did was it built work ethic, it built discipline. It taught me how to reach for a common goal and how to work with other races and cultures, AKA teammates. So as I continued on, I said, look, sports, music, and acting, how can all three of these things come together? Well, let me tell you how they can come together. There would be 2 upcoming events in my life that would definitely make things click for me. The first time was when we moved to Virginia. I was in high school and I spent 3 years playing football. I had a couple colleges looking at me, but that same dilemma came up again. We were being stationed to another state, this time New York again. And this is the first time I learned what sacrifice meant. See, understand, sacrifice isn't something you're born with, and it's not a gift. It's something that has to be learned, it has to be acquired. And I had the best teachers, which were my parents. They both split apart my whole senior year. My dad lived in New York. I stayed in Virginia with my mother. And this is just so they gave me a better opportunity to play college sports. Now, prior to this, my grades weren't that good. I was struggling to even get into college, and I probably gave my parents too much trouble as it is. But I needed their sacrifice to push me towards success. Because if I didn't realize what sacrifice meant, I don't think I would eventually got this upcoming scholarship that came my way. So I remember when my dad showed up at my job and he goes, Morgan State University is offering you a full athletic scholarship. I was like, woo, I could finally breathe. Their sacrifice wasn't in vain. You know, everything that they put on the table for me, I was able to reward them with this scholarship. So I ended up playing 1 year of football at Morgan State University. Then I transferred to Salisbury University to continue my studies. Now understand, I'd leaned towards football and I had a one-track mind and I thought that was my purpose in life, nothing else. So I kept pushing aside my mother's encouragement to try different things. And because of that, music and acting started to go dormant. What changed all this for me was, as I was at Salisbury my junior year, I tore my meniscus. And this was the first time that I really hit a crossroads in my life. And I said to myself, you know, what is my true reason for being here on earth? What is my purpose? What is my legacy going to look like outside of just playing a sport? And so I started thinking to myself, all this adjusting I did all my life, and I'm about to leave the one thing that's consistent, which is sports, and namely football. But I thought this to myself, why not try something that's new, but also familiar? So I leaned back and I said, hey, I haven't acted in over 10 years, but it's not foreign to me. So I tried out for an improv play and my mother rung in my ear louder than she ever did. And I was so fortunate that I tried out for this play. The end result was I had to cram for a bunch of credits because I ended up changing my major senior year. But also when I was out of school, Penn State University offered me an opportunity to enter their graduate acting program. And I said this to myself, because after this time I had gained experience and learned life lessons. I said, if I get into this school, then this is obviously my next path in life. If I don't, then I'll build my music career and I'll get a job. This was the thing. I wasn't willing to bank on just one thing ever again in my life. And I had to learn to just trust the process. There are certain things you can't change and you just have to, pretty much accept in your life. So acting didn't reveal itself any further, so I did just that. I got a good job and I started building my music career. The next half of my life would be full of perseverance. A year and a half out of college, I became a single father. I adopted my oldest son, Ezekiel, from a prior relationship. And 8 years later, I had my blood child, Kingston. Now, there's absolutely no difference between my kids. I treat them exactly the same. I'm dad, I'm their teacher, and I'm their best friend, all wrapped in one. Both my kids were born in Baltimore City. I've been in Baltimore City since 1998. So after all of this moving around, Baltimore City is home for me. Now, to support my family, I worked for a government contractor for 7 years down at the Pentagon. Then I worked another 6 years in a Maryland office. This was a very tough time in my life because one, I was commuting from Baltimore City to Washington, D.C., but I was also working 12-hour shifts while I was raising both of my sons. And also during this time, I was constantly writing, recording, and even traveling for shows. But there are two things that I applied in my music career from prior skills. One, I took the work ethic and the drive that I acquired from sports and football and I applied it to my music. I took the skills I learned from acting and I applied it to my stage shows. So the lesson here is that give 1,000%, not 100, 1,000% to everything you do because you never know when something's going to come full circle and help you in the future. So other events started coming into play, and as all these factors came into my puzzle of life, it started revealing to me what my true purpose was. And this happened when I opened up my label, New Revolution Entertainment. I put the focus on making music that's entertaining but also educational to the masses. And I dubbed my style conscious commercial hip hop because you can bob your head to my music, but it intellectually stimulates your mind. I make blue collar music for everyday hardworking people. So what happened was when I started hearing supporters telling me that my music was motivating them and it was giving them a different perspective on life and it was pushing them towards purpose, that was powerful feedback for me. That was enough feedback to tell me that this is my purpose. Not only am I here to make music, but to help others. And so I took that and I pretty much ran with it. And I started moving things forward, pretty much from there. The big question I had to ask myself was this: how do you make a living off of impacting lives? And is that something truly that's monetary? Well, again, I leaned back on prior skills, and all those years working for the government, I knew there were grant programs that could help me facilitate my concerts, my workshops and classes, not just here in the US, but abroad. And also researching, I learned that basically music licensing is a way to create long-term income from independent artists. So one of the first things I did, even before putting my first song out, is I started pitching my music to networks and major licensing companies. And to this day, I built great relationships with Netflix, ESPN, WWE, and more. I also started pumping out 2 to 3 proposals weekly to different U.S. embassies around the world where I felt my music and my message would impact their underserved youth and inspire musicians in other countries. And what happened was I started to build these great partnerships. I no longer became just a musician because I saw that my music was here to engage the community, and it's also here to help the youth become productive members of society. So my partnerships with Armed Forces Entertainment, it helped me take me to countries like Bahrain, Kuwait, and UAE to perform for our great troops. My partnership with the U.S. Department of State has sent me to places like Angola, Ukraine, Azerbaijan, and many more. And the great thing about these trips is I'm not just doing concerts, I'm living out my purpose. I'm going to disability centers, I'm going to orphanages, I'm going to small villages, I'm even going to towns where there were a lot of gang activity. Basically, I went to a lot of different places that most American artists wouldn't dare to go to because that is my purpose, living out my purpose. My other reason for going is to show the best of the American arts community while also creating cross-cultural values. So, again, living out my purpose, just a different face. Spending 6 years on the road, it definitely quenched my thirst for helping others. But when I got an opportunity to work with the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, it was an honor for a few reasons. Unfortunately, classical music isn't very diverse. And so I really looked at it like this. In the city I live in Baltimore, over 60% of our population is African American. Though we have this form of music classical, that's not really touching that population. So I really look at myself as someone that can help bridge that gap as a familiar face to help minority communities feel more comfortable coming into classical atmospheres. But I would have to say, definitely, the cherry on top was opening up my nonprofit, Rise with a Purpose. I chose Rise with a Purpose because that's how I live my life and that's how I envision the world. And I was gonna wait and hold off and not open up my nonprofit for a couple of years. But there were 2 things that really stuck to me. One, we don't have any music education in our public school system in Baltimore City. So I'm currently raising money to put a permanent music school in our city. The other thing I'm working on is we have a big homeless issue. So I want to create what's called a community lunch line where the homeless can try different cultures of food, mingle with everyday people, but also bring different employees there to help them get back on their feet. I know what music has done for me. It's provided me a way of living, it takes care of my kids, and it provides me an opportunity to help the youth. So I'm all about this point in my career being about helping others. Now, what I want you to understand is overall, as you see, I didn't know my purpose for the longest, and my path was all over the place until I found it. But I applied a few principles that you heard me talk about earlier of being willing to adjust, being willing to accept others' perspective, recognizing my defining moments, learning to sacrifice and learning to persevere, trusting the process, and eventually having a goal to attain. All these things help the puzzle pieces of my life slowly come together to where I hope and I feel that I redefine what making it really means. It's not about reaching celebrity status. Again, it's about doing your passion in life, and the moment you can take care of yourself and your family, you have made it. So what I would like to do is I would like to invite any and everybody who's been watching today, take the journey of life, discover your gifts, and seek out your purpose. Thanks so much for listening.